Hey guys, it's Haley and welcome to another bookish video. Today we are getting into another day of happy Haley days, and today's video is a top 12 recommendation video. It's going to be a little bit different than my past top 12 recs videos. If you've missed other videos in this series, I have an entire playlist of every single top 12 recs I've ever done. If you've never seen a top 12 recs video, it's where I pick a certain genre, subgenre, trope, category, etc. and I give you my top 12 book recommendations within that niche. Today is a pretty broad niche. We're going for all nonfiction. So in this video, we have self-help, psychology, true crime. Oh God, what else do we have? Like essay collections, just like general knowledge. Any nonfiction that has called out to me and made it into my top favorites. And if you watch this video and you want more recommendations, I always have bonus recs on my Patreon. That bonus content is up right now. If you want to go check it out, the link for my Patreon is always down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my top 12 favorite nonfiction book recommendations. I think I'm going to start out with true crime because I have a couple of those on this list. It is quite difficult to be a true crime book and make it into any of my favorite book recs because I'm pretty picky with my true crime content. Honestly, with anything having to do with even fringing on mental health, that just is kind of touchy for me as a mental health professional, and a lot of true crime I don't think is handled super ethically, but these couple books I think capture it really, really well. The first one is American Kingpin by Nick Bilton. This is about the dark web. It's basically about the creator of the Silk Road, which if you don't know what the Silk Road is, it was a website on the dark web, the deep web, etc., where it was basically Amazon for anything illegal. Guns, human trafficking, organs, drugs, whatever. This goes into how it was created, how it persisted, and the eventual fall of the Silk Road, all about the creator of it, and it goes into lore about the dark web. Some of this sounds fictional. Like, I could not believe as I was reading this that this actually happened in real life. It sent me on a Reddit deep dive. I watched like 4 different documentaries after I read this book. I was absolutely obsessed. If you like getting niche hyperfixations about true events, you will love American Kingpin. Trust me, it is fascinating. This is definitely my top true crime rec. And another one of my favorite nonfictions and another true crime book. This one is probably less popular. You might not have heard of it. It is called The Last Victim. It's by Jason Moss. And it's about this man, Jason Moss, who wrote the book. In college, he was just obsessed with psychology, sociology, true crime, etc. So he started writing to serial killers on death row. And these are not just like your run-of-the-mill killer, okay? This is, we're talking like Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, like he went for the big guns, okay? And he actually had a dialogue, a back and forth with these killers. He details his experience talking to these severely evil people in this book, and he talks about how he himself was their last victim just by being involved with them and letting himself like be a victim to their manipulation. Even just through letters, you see how their sociopathy is so deeply ingrained, and it is chilling. It is truly a chilling account of what this man actually went through in real life. I love that it is from the perspective of the victim, so we get all of the raw accounts. It's no like conjecture mental health wise, it's all of his own experience. And unfortunately, the author of this book, Jason Moss, did end up taking his own life and dying by suicide. So that's a really sad aspect of this book. Please look at trigger warnings before going in, because this is an account of how someone's mental health just deteriorates. However, he is not criminalized at all, so I don't feel like there's any shoddy mental health stuff going on there. This is just purely his own experience. And if you're interested in psychopathy and how it truly affects the average run-of-the-mill person, not someone who's the direct victim of a crime, you should read this. It is so endlessly interesting. The next couple recommendations on this list are my favorite memoirs. First up, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is all about iCarly's star, Jennette McCurdy, and her life growing up as a child star with a very, very damaged attachment relationship, specifically with her mother. It details her eating disorder, her journey throughout her mental health, ebbing, flowing, all of the things as she went through these very abnormal life events at critical developmental points throughout her life. It's written with such empathy and you really feel her experience. I absolutely sobbed and broke down reading this book. It is phenomenal. It talks about grief, mental health, so many things that like every person deals with, but through her own specific lens, which she captures so well. I would love to read more of her writing. I think she's so talented. This is easily one of my favorite memoirs I've ever read, and definitely one of my favorite nonfictions as well. And the other memoir to make this list is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, also known as Japanese Breakfast. I absolutely adore her music, but she wrote this book about grieving for her mother and also reconnecting to her heritage, which is kind of a fraught relationship throughout the course of her life, and of course that develops over the course of her memoir. She talks about her life experiences through the lens of her family of origin, and it is so visceral. You feel everything she's writing about, very similar to Jennette McCurdy. These two memoirs are just some of the most raw accounts of women's experience that I've ever read. And specifically, if you want to hear about an Asian American experience, I think Crying in H Mart is flawless. I felt such empathy for her, not understanding her place or who she is through the lens of her racial identity versus where she is in America, trying to assimilate and fit in with American girls. I just loved every second of listening to this book. It is narrated by Michelle herself and it is incredible. And the last memoir I have on this list is actually a read from 2024 this year, and that is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I feel like this one is so basic. Like everybody loves this book, but it's for a good reason. I resisted reading it for so long because I was just like, it's hyped. It's probably overhyped. Like it's a book talk book. I don't believe it. Y'all, it's worth it. I'm here to tell you it's worth the hype. I love the lens with which Dolly approaches this memoir. She talks about what she knows about love throughout the course of her life from the age of I think 16 or something up into her 30s, and we see how her ideas about love and relationships and herself through the lens of these things shifts over the course of her lifetime. It is so interesting. It really captures the essence of girlhood and growing up. I think if you're in your early and mid 20s, this is a must read. You will feel so seen, so held while reading this. She's so relatable and just upfront is the word that comes to mind when I think about Dolly Alderton's writing style in this book. And of course, as the title suggests, everything comes back to love and attachment relationships. Dolly clearly goes on this very visceral healing journey, and I could see myself in her throughout the course of the book, knowing that it was real and that I was being seen not just by a character, but by a real human, really came through throughout the course of the book, and I absolutely adored it. Next up, let's get into more psychological self-help kind of books. First up, we have probably my most recommended book of all time, and y'all have probably never heard of this. And I know what you're thinking, how is this your most recommended book of all time, but you've never talked about it on YouTube? I mostly recommend this to clients and colleagues, and that is because this is the book that has changed my life the most, and it is very triggering. Please do your due diligence before you get into this book. Please know what the material is before you get into this book. That is The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and I read this for school and had basically a complete crisis while reading this book for my trauma class in school, but it's also something that I use every single day within my private practice. If you guys don't know, I'm a trauma therapist, and most of my clients have severe developmental trauma. I apply what I learned from this book within every single session. It's really just about how your body holds onto trauma, and as a somatic therapist, that really hits home. It was life-changing for me to see my own trauma and my own body through the lens of what this book taught me. It really goes through Bessel van der Kolk's own clients as case studies, and we see how people hold on to internalized pieces of trauma within the body unconsciously throughout the course of their lifetime. It talks about how generational patterns and events might affect us without us being cognizant of it, and it's just very deeply impactful. I think everyone should read this book. I literally feel like it should be required reading. Next up, we have Confessions of a Sociopath, A Life Spent Hiding in Plain Sight by M.E. Thomas. And this one is about sociopathy. It's about the experience of antisocial personality disorder, what it's like to live with it, what it's like to be devoid of empathy, the actual experience of it rather than the stigmatization of it. I think personality disorders are some of the most stigmatized things that we talk about in mental health, and so it's really interesting to get a first person's account of what it's like to live with those symptoms. If you've ever wondered about sociopathy, psychopathy, the difference between them, or what even antisocial personality disorder is, you should read this book. It is really deeply impactful, and it takes you through what it's like to have the thought process of someone who has had to develop a lack of empathy in order to survive. That is ultimately what a personality disorder is born from, at least within my clinical lens, is a traumatic protective response from the body. So it kind of gives you empathy for people who have none, which I think is a really beautiful and difficult thing. It requires a lot of vulnerability on your own part, but I think it's really worth the read if you're interested. And my last kind of like mental health related recommendation is Brain on Fire by Susanna Cahalan. And this is about a woman in her mid-20s who has a mental health crisis. Her brain starts breaking down, fragmenting, and she has a mental break. We learn about the early warning signs, what it's like to be in the midst of it, how she got through it, and her resiliency coming out of the other side. It's really about the worst that can happen when trauma suddenly comes up in your body and cannot be ignored. And it was really, really deeply impactful for me, especially working with severe trauma and crisis management within my practice. I really enjoyed reading this book and feeling the resilience that is possible on the other side. It's deeply impactful. It's also been made into a movie, like some kind of like biopic deal. I haven't watched it, but I'm really interested in it. Let me know down below if you've watched it and you recommend it. Next up, I have a couple horror-based things. If you know me and you know that I love horror, I also love horror movies, and more generally, just like horror lore. I love thinking about horror, its impact on culture, specifically queer culture and women, and how marginalized groups can really utilize horror for empowerment. And that is really what this first recommendation in this little horror category is all about. And that is, of course, It Came from the Closet. I have recommended this before. It's an essay collection from all queer and trans people about what horror means to them. Each story is through the lens of a different kind of horror movie. So we have like different sections throughout the book, like this one is Fatal Attraction. Every horror trope has its own thing, like monster movies, etc. And every essay is inspired by a specific horror movie. Like this one is The Ring and Pet Sematary. This one is Jennifer's Body, and it's all about bisexuality. It is by queer people, for queer people, and all about why horror impacts us so deeply, how we see ourselves in horror, how that trajectory has started from the like 60s, 70s, 80s to now, how representation has lacked and improved. It's just a really compelling essay collection about the intersection of queerness and horror, and I love it so much. The other nonfiction recommendation I have within this horror category is Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix, which I really, really loved and has sent me down an entire rabbit hole reading actual paperbacks from hell. In this account of horror history, Grady Hendrix takes us through the iconic trashy horror paperbacks of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the different tropes that were perpetuated in it, different factors that went into the popularity of these little horror novels in this very specific time, how this resurgence of horror is showing up now, the impact of paperbacks from hell on today, and of course all of these iconic paperbacks from hell are being brought back. Now I actually have quite a few of the like newly republished ones, and I'm really enjoying reading through them and just kind of getting my horror history, feeling some of the nostalgia of them. If you're interested in anything horror history related, if you like the nostalgia of the 80s, you will love reading Paperbacks from Hell. And my last two nonfiction recommendations that I have for you are some feminist literature. There are some quite iconic pieces of feminist literature that are not on this list. I love The Feminine Mystique. That is like the original girl. I had to read it in school when I was an undergrad, and that really just shook my little undergrad brain. But I feel like that is like almost bordering on a classic, so I didn't want to include it in this list. I have some more niche feminist literature for you. Starting out with one of my favorites of 2023, which is Word Slut by Amanda Montell. In Word Slut, Amanda gets into our language and how specific words and linguistics within the English language shape misogyny within our culture and are deeply influenced by the patriarchy and thereby keep influencing the power of the patriarchy. I never really sat with how language impacts me until I read this book, and the way that Amanda Montell speaks about it, she's clearly so passionate and so knowledgeable about this topic, and you feel it in every word. I loved the audiobook for Word Slut because it's narrated by the author and you can feel what she knows in every word that she says. She says it with intention and it really helps you grasp it and integrate the knowledge of it. I felt so seen reading this. I feel like every girl has a visceral first memory of being called a certain name that implied something about her femininity or sexuality, and this book goes over those experiences, but also the science behind language. I appreciated every second of this book. Not only did I feel seen while reading it, but it also taught me a lot, gave me context for my experience, and just was endlessly interesting as a study in linguistics. I love the feminist lens that she brought, and I also just really like Amanda Montell as a person. I think she's very, very smart. And the other feminist rec that I have for you to round out my top 12 nonfic recommendations is Girlhood by Melissa Febos. I read this year, and I have visceral memories of reading this in Barton Springs. If you know Austin, Texas, then you probably know Barton Springs. It is one of my favorite places on earth, and I was reading this book in the grass at Barton Springs, just absolutely sobbing because it was like a full circle beautiful moment for me. I could not get over it. If you have memories of girlhood that are fuzzy or uncomfortable or awkward, as we all do, and you want to recontextualize them from the healing lens of adulthood, this is a great one for you. In this book, Melissa is basically questioning the narratives that she was sold as a young girl, whether it's about her sexuality, her body, her development, etc. And she examines those narratives from a new lens, from a feminist lens, from a healed lens, and starts to reclaim different pieces of herself and her body. It's like part analysis and essay, part memoir, and part personal experience and self self-help healing journey. It's all of that wrapped into one. It is so deeply impactful. I'm not gonna lie, I had to read this one really slowly because it was a lot. It was triggering just for me personally, but I think it was really, really worth the read. It has a depth, a just true depth of information in such a small condensed package. I loved it so much. And if you just think about being a girl and what that means to you, you will love this book. So that is going to do it for my top 12 nonfiction recommendations. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if you want 4 more recs, I have that bonus content up on Patreon now. So go check it out if you want. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and joining me for another day of Happy Hailey Days. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you liked it, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And don't forget to go to therapy and read a book this week. I will see you guys in my next video.